You've tried to make a resource inside. No, a resource is a stupid word. It's such a generic term. Here we go. 5, 4, 3. You've tried to create your website inside Azure and then the storage account, and then you want your a VM perhaps, or maybe some sort of Redis cache. You've done it.
Absolutely. I mean, you've gone through all your resources, blade after blade after blade. Wouldn't it be great if there was a way that you could take what you're typing into that screen and just reusing it in a simple way?
You want to sidestep the portal using CLI?
Or PowerShell? No, I don't think so. I think we want something different.
There's another way, and we're going to talk about it on this episode of Dev Radio. Hi, and welcome to the next episode of Microsoft Dev Radio. I'm here with Darren. Darren, hi.
Hey, Jerry.
And we're back. We're talking about resource files in Windows Forms and how you change localization.
No, that's the next one.
That's the other kind of resource. That's right. We're talking about resource objects in Azure and how you create them in an easy way.
And how you can integrate them into your development operations.
Have you ever created a resource in Azure before?
Once or twice.
Yeah, it's pretty straightforward, but it's also kind of complicated.
Well, it is. I mean, if you think about it, there's a lot of UI flows that are generated around those things. Wouldn't it be great if instead of having to keep going into the UI and typing in those things over and over again, there was an easier way to manage that?
Yeah, I wish there was some sort of manager for those resources, a kind of resource manager. We got Gaurav on the phone here with us. He's the senior program manager with Azure Resource Manager. I can't imagine somebody better to talk about resource management. Gaurav, thanks for being on the show. For anybody who doesn't know who you are, who are you?
Hi folks, I'm Gaurav Bhatnagar. I'm a program manager, as Jerry said, on the Azure Resource Manager team. I've been with Microsoft for, I think I completed my 10 years a couple of months ago. So I've been with Microsoft for 10 years. With this team specifically, I've been there for last 4 years. So I've seen the early days of Azure Resource Manager and helped it, kind of shape it to the product that it is today. So super happy to be here talking to you guys about Azure Resource Manager, DevOps, and any cool things we would like to talk about.
Okay, so let's back up to just the DevOps landscape today. So let's see, it was just a handful of weeks ago we changed the name of Visual Studio
Team Services
to Azure DevOps. And is that what we're talking about? Give us kind of the scope of what developers have in their toolbox right now.
Yeah, so we recently had a big kind of product alignments in the Azure Visual Studio Team Services landscape. We rebranded it, brought a lot of products which are, kind of living in silos, brought them together to complete that whole end-to-end experience. But no, that is not what we're talking about, although that is a very important piece of our DevOps story. What we are going to focus today is, I think in Azure Resource Manager, we have added new capabilities, how to enable you as a customer to better enable you to safely roll out your deployments, and how does that fit into this new products that we have announced on the VSTS side, and how does this new service fit in? I think we'll focus on the latter part, which is what are the new capabilities if I want to deploy my template in a safe manner, and what have we done at Microsoft to better do your job at it. And then we can also touch base around how does that integrate with Azure DevOps and the things going on in the Visual Studio Team Services landscape.
Okay, let's talk about this idea of a template. A lot of developers may not be familiar just yet. So this obviously, your template's going to be important in resource management. Tell me what a template is and kind of where that plays into the role of an application development lifecycle.
Sure. So in Azure, there are really two ways to create to create a resource, right? And as customers onboard to Azure in their journey, right, the very first thing is they want to create a resource, and they jump on the first way to create a resource, which is an imperative way to create a resource. Now, an imperative way might be you go to Azure portal and start looking through the UX and you create a resource. Let's take an example, virtual machine, right? So you want to create a virtual machine in Azure. You go to Azure portal, you go to find the virtual machine blade, and you walk through that UX. Or you can go to PowerShell or CLI and run a commandlet to do the same thing. Now think of it as now you want to not just create a virtual machine in Azure, now you want to create 10 other things because those are needed for your
Yeah.
application to run on. And so do you want to write a script for that? Maybe, but it has its own limitations. So you can orchestrate this whole 10 resource creation thing through a PowerShell or a serialized script. But what is better is the second way of creating resources or creating your infra in Azure, which is through this template, which is like the second way. And that template creation is a declarative way to create resources. Now, declarative meaning you can define a file, which is a template file that is like a JSON representation of the resources you want to create. And using that file, you tell the service, you tell Azure, hey, take my infra to this goal state, right? I want to deploy this virtual machine. Here is the config for my virtual machine described in this file, and all the other 10 resources that I need, all the properties that are needed on that, defined as a config through that file, and now I can execute that file. Now, the most important part about this new model is it makes your deployment repeatable, because now I can execute that file over and over again, and I can be guaranteed that this is an idempotent deployment where every execution of that file will result in the same goal state if the inputs are same, obviously. So now you have automated your deployment and made it idempotent. So that's like,
Mm.
what a template file is and how it comes into the play in terms of orchestrating your deployments or, creating your infrastructure.
Now, a lot of developers prior to now have really had no other option but to create some PowerShell scripts to be able to deploy things automatically. Let's pretend that's me, and I'm a PowerShell guy. I love PowerShell, and then I hired this guy. He comes in, he's like, you really should use templates, and I'm like, I think we know what we're doing. We've been doing this with PowerShell for a year now. Why is his approach better? Like, what's better than just a set of PowerShell scripts that seem to get the job done?
Yeah, so I think we touched upon one important area, but there are a few more areas, right? So scripting by nature is not like idempotent. So you can run a script, but if it fails in the middle of an execution, the next time I run a script, I'm not guaranteed that it will just pick up from where I left and it failed the last time and it will just continue. With this new model around being declarative, whatever got deployed before it failed will be untouched. And then it will pick up right from there and make sure nothing is overwritten, nothing is recreated, and you will just get whatever you needed that you described in that config file. You will get it without having to worry about, oh, how do I handle my error cases now because it failed the first time. I don't know what was created, what was not created. You don't have to worry about all those cases and build that casing into your scripting and handle those conditions in your script. So you are at peace of mind. Oh, I've written my template once and I hand it off to the service and it will make sure that I get whatever I've described in that file.
So how would somebody go about creating one of these templates?
Yeah, it sounds complicated.
That is a very good question. And yes, at the starting point of your journey, you will be overwhelmed if you look at this file and if you are, orchestrating a complex deployment across 10 resources and whatnot, because you have a prod service that you need to now deploy through this template, right? It can be overwhelming, but there are a few ways on how we have enabled you to get a jump start on this template creation. So one of those ways is you go to your portal and you create these resources, by clicking through the UX, right? Okay, painful. Or you have your script and you have run your script which has created these resources in a resource group in Azure. So resource group in Azure is where every resource is getting deployed to, right? So for however way you have chosen, you have these resources up and running. And now you are thinking, oh, I want to get to the next step in my maturity model of using Azure. And I want to now make my deployments repeatable and idempotent and whatnot. Okay, how do I get this template, right? So now the first capability that we have enabled is you go to that resource group where you have your resources up and running. And you click a button and we will generate that template for you for whatever resources are present in that resource group. And we will generate this, templatized version of your deployment that is already present. And so you get a starting point. You're like, oh, you don't have to start from scratch. You have all the resources that are needed in a templatized fashion. Obviously, it is not prod ready, right? But you have a starting point. So you're not like, starting from scratch and writing JSON in an editor, right? So that's one. Now, other thing is, okay, you have the starting point, but still you have to make changes to it. And you have to know, oh, I want to add auto scaling, but I don't know how to add auto scaling to my virtual machine or to my virtual machine scale set and things like those, right? So you open that template file in Visual Studio Code or Visual Studio, wherever, and now you are on that, and we'll see an example later on maybe, but you open that template that you got from our service, you go to that virtual machine resource section and you click tab, and there you get all the intelligence about
Oh, nice.
what you need to add. So you type auto scaling and maybe it starts showing you some smart defaults and what is allowed, what properties can you add, all those things. So that's number two, right? How in our tooling we have kind of enabled you to better get feedback about what is allowed, what is not allowed. So I would recommend, and then thirdly, I think, which is another critical piece, is we have a very rich samples repo on GitHub, wherein you get, all these building blocks that you need to create a full-blown service architecture to complicated samples, right? So you get a simple virtual machine sample to a full-blown 3-tier application sample, right? So you get those samples that you can reference if you're trying to solve a scenario. So those three things are, a good, starting points on how you can start consuming these templates, which, by the way, yes, it's not for a starting developer, it's not an easy task, but hopefully using these three ways, it makes your lives easy, a little bit easy.
Yeah, I gotta tell you, Gaurav, it just hit me. So I go in and I've created these ARM templates before, and it just hit me that ARM, gosh, seems so stupid, but it's Azure Resource Manager. I never put that together. I thought I was writing for an ARM chip. I didn't think that, but I never knew what it was about.
I always get that question in every talk. ARM. Oh, what is ARM? Are you going to talk about that chip?
Yeah.
That processor? No, guys, hold on.
These mnemonics are so overloaded now.
I know. This was my ARM for the longest time.
Yes.
Yeah. Well, hey, would it be cool if you showed us a quick demo of how it all worked?
Sure. We can take a sample template. I can point you to. We can take a look at the sample repo. Take a look at how one of these templates look like. Yeah, sure.
Cool.
So let me share my screen.
Okay, Gaurav, I can see your screen. What am I looking at?
So as we talked about, we have a very rich set of samples on GitHub repos. So I just opened one, which is a simple virtual machine creation. And let's take a look at the samples, like a representation of that in a template file, right? So this is my template, which will create a virtual machine in Azure for me. So here you can see like some of the key elements of a template file is a parameters file, right? Or parameter section. So there are inputs that you need from the executor of this template, right? So you are creating a virtual machine, you want the admin username and admin password, right? So I have parameterized those, wherein when someone runs this template, it will prompt for, okay, give me an admin username because that is what is needed for me to successfully execute this template. So similarly, other things that you need as an input from the user can be put in this parameters section. And then there are variables that you can, the other important section of a template file is the variables, right? So variables are where you need some values for the execution of this template. So this is where variable section come in, and really the meat of a template is the resources section, which is where I define all the resources that I need to create in Azure. So you can see the first resource that I'm creating here is a storage account, because this is where the disk that I need for my virtual machine creation will live. So I've created a storage account, and you can see,
Well, let me stop you for a second, Gaurav. Sure. So just so I understand, so the parameters are the values that I'm going to be passing in whenever I execute it, and then the variables, those are just values I'm going to reuse over and over again.
That is correct, yes.
Okay, got it.
And so this, is a very basic example of a virtual machine template. Let me quickly hop on over to the parameters file, because I might have a template file which is working for my dev environment. Think of now the whole pipeline from dev to test to prod. How do you want to move your infra or your application between these environments? Because that's a very typical common scenario, right? So you have these three environments: a dev environment, a test environment, and maybe a pre-prod or a prod environment. And an application developer makes a change to the application and deploys that to the dev environment. Now you want to be able to test that change in the dev environment. So what you want to happen is not only you want the infra to be provisioned, you want the app code to be deployed on that infra, and then you want some tests to be run. And upon successful completion of those tests, you want to move now to the next environment, which may be the pre-prod environment. So the place where these parameter file comes into the picture is in your prod environment, you may need 10 instances of your virtual machine. But in your dev environment, you may just need one. So if the number of instances that need to be deployed is a parameter, you can use a different parameter file for your test environment and a different one for your prod environment. So this really helps you use the same template, but just change the parameter file, which is like the inputs that are needed, and you can use the same template across environments. Now that gives you the peace of mind because you are testing the exact same thing in prod that you have deployed in prod. You're testing the same thing in your test environment. So that is one of the benefits of this parameters file.
Got it. So in order to pass in all the parameters for this template, it's not a bunch of switch statements or whatever when you call it. You pass two things. You pass the template file as well as the parameters file.
Correct.
I got it. That's pretty clean.
And so also in the other file where you were showing the variables section, you could promote some of those variables up as parameters, and then that gives you that flexibility to change things like the names, the allow values, all those IP addresses. Yes.
Yes, it's completely on how you want to construct that and how you want to author that, and you can move between variables and parameters. That is precisely right. Now the second thing, let's quickly see, we talked about like another way of, oh, I don't want to hand write all this JSON, right? Guys, give me something. So this is where, I have a resource group which contains these resources that I've already gone in and created by walking through the UX. So you can see here, the resources there's a storage account, there is a function app, there is a app service that is running in that in this particular resource group, and there is an app service plan associated with that app service, right? Now this is a very simple kind of a front end and a storage account that is being used by that front end kind of an app, right? But still, I don't want to hand write that template even for the simple one, right? So what you can do is you go over to this automation script option on portal and click on that, and here now we'll generate this template for all the resources that are there in this resource group. So here you can see we have generated all the resources, the storage account, the template representation of the storage account that you created with all the properties that was set on that storage account right here in the template format for you guys to now start using.
Now, Gaurav, one of the tricks a developer might do, you tell me, is they want to figure it out. They want to maybe find a sample that you've got on GitHub that shows how to add some extra feature. They could just add the extra feature, recreate the automation script, and just look at the changes too.
Precisely, yes.
Yeah, that's beautiful. Now, I see a little warning up top. Talk to me about that.
Yes. So now this is not perfect, right? This is where it is giving you a jump start, but not in every case will it work, right? And those cases are, it is not, kind of an issue where it failed, but like for this template to be generated, right, we need a schema representation published somewhere. So as new types are getting added to every Azure service, at a very fast cadence, that thing that needs to be published to that repo on GitHub may not always be updated. So it might be a case where this export failed or was not able to generate the template representation of certain types, and it is telling you, oh, there are certain types that you have created. We were not able to generate a template for those because we couldn't find a good schematic representation of those. And it will give you a list of, okay, what are those types and whatnot. But on our side, we're trying to keep up the pace with, the service teams, making or deploying new service types or new resource types every week. We're trying to keep that up, and hopefully, there will be a point where there is consistency between what can be templatized or, exported through the template here versus, the new capabilities that get added. So this is just telling you, okay, what was not outputted as part of this template which you already had in your resource group.
So the other thing I thought was pretty cool about this automation script is not only does it generate the template, but it also gives you some implementations that will actually invoke that template for you. I noticed you've got PowerShell, .NET, Ruby as examples on here, and I thought that was pretty cool when I was looking at this.
Yeah, so you can execute this template right here and click on this deploy button using PowerShell or CLI or .NET, yes, or you can download this template and put it in your source control repo, and you can now start executing it using the script.
Yeah.
So that comes into a phrase I've heard quite a lot about, kind of DevOps and managing configurations and so on, which is to treat configuration as code. And you've just talked about the life cycle there, where you want to take this snapshot of your environment and your configuration and then leverage source code control so you can actually track those changes. Because one of the key scenarios you obviously want to try and deal with is if you introduce a change that impacts production in a negative way, you want to be able to quickly roll back.
Mm-hmm.
Exactly. And this is, every DevOps guy we talk to, there are like 2 or 3 challenges that he's trying to solve, right? He wants to be able to minimize the downtime of a service, meaning, oh, my developer has just made a check-in or has added functionality to my service. I want to make sure I deploy it in a way so that my existing customers are not hitting any downtime when I deploy this new functionality, right? And secondly, when I deploy it, I want to deploy it in a safe manner because this again, these are mission critical apps that are running in the cloud and I don't want my customers to be impacted. So how do I do those? And thirdly, I want to do them in a very fast manner because my service is spinning changes, right? The developers are adding features on a very fast cadence. I shouldn't, as a DevOps guy, I shouldn't throw fits when, on every deployment, I have to plan it out and it is taking 3 to 5 days for just a single deployment to happen. More so when, now I want to just make my service available in a new region, right? Nothing changed. I just want to make the same service and deploy it in a new region. It shouldn't, it shouldn't give you the fits when you just want to do that, right? So how do you enable those scenarios? And which is where I think this new service that we have launched recently and announced at Ignite, Azure Deployment Manager comes in, which lets you take more control over what you are deploying and deploy that in a reliable and a safe manner.
So does that kind of allow you to schedule deployments and so on for downtime periods and monitor progress and revert back? Is that kind of the capabilities that gives you?
I think it gives you 2 or 3 main capabilities. One is it lets you deploy in a safe manner. So by that, what I mean is you deploy. So in DevOps, we kind of, push or try to push people towards this microservice architecture, right? Where you have highly componentized your service, right? Your front end is a component, your back end is a component, even in your back end, there may be a caching layer. So you have these small components, right? So being able to describe these small components and update these small components without having to redeploy the entire service is one of the capabilities, right? And then as I'm deploying these components, right? If the deployment of my first component is bad, I should be able to detect it very early and fail. I should not proceed with my deployment because one of my components has already failed. I know that, so I don't need to wait for the entire service deployment to complete and then say, okay, something went wrong. And the third thing is being able to monitor that on an ongoing basis, right? We have to build, like every developer had to build monitoring into this infrastructure deployment. So we have added those capabilities so that you can get rich monitoring as this deployment is going on. And not just that, if you have already using some third party or whatever monitoring story you are using already, you can just easily plug into that using this new service. Mm-hmm. And I think there is a fourth key element to that where I'm deploying my service, right? And I'm deploying this to different resource groups where my backend may be going to a different resource group because I want to manage the life cycle of that backend separately from my front end. But I have no idea after this deployment is completed what is my service footprint, right? What are the different components of my service? What got updated? So all those things, we have added some new constructs around those so that it makes you easier to understand them and interact with them and manage them.
Yeah, because you can get very, very complex production environments, as you say, with different resource groups. And I've heard, suggestions to use tagging to try and illustrate how these resources tie together. But clearly being able to provide some sort of overview of your dependencies beyond that is really key.
Yeah, that is correct. Yes.
Now, Gaurav, let me ask you a quick question. I export my ARM template and I start monkeying with it until it's unbelievable. I can deploy across all these different groups. Everything is perfect. I have all of these parameters set up, and it is really valuable. And I think maybe I could share it with Darren. What kind of options do I have as far as like sharing a template without necessarily giving him access to my source control or something like that?
Are you going to share it out of the goodness of your heart, or are you going to try and make some money off it?
Well, I mean, since it's you.
Yeah, we know what that
means. So that's a very good question, right? Because this is a very common scenario that you have spent your time and energy and your sweat into constructing this, template, this application. And now you think that, oh, this application is not just good for myself or my team. It could be used by my company, or more so, it could be used by other companies as well. So I want to monetize on this, right? So there are like few ways I think that are available or for your disposal. And those ways are, we have a service catalog, right? So an enterprise IT can create a catalog of these applications, which are nothing more than these template files that you have orchestrated, and publish them to that enterprise catalog and make it available to all employees or a specific employee or a specific team in your company, and make it available to them. It works like the sharing works as any sharing works in Azure, which is through RBAC. Like you can share a resource or a template with, a user or a user group or a service principal, right?
So I like this solution because it's secure, and if my company is invested in it, they don't want me to share it with Darren, but they do want me to share it with other teams. So that solution's nice because it's all internal and secure.
And there is even a better part to this, right? Which is the consumer. So you have shared it. Let's say you have shared it with everybody in the company, right? Because your enterprise IT felt this is a good solution. Everybody in my company should use it, right?
Yeah.
Now, that some team in your organization starts consuming it, and they run into an issue. They're like, oh, something went wrong, but we don't understand this complex template. How do we debug it? So that is the best part about this is, you can create a managed offering of this template where your central IT team can still be in control of managing it and debugging it for you, or upgrading it for you, or hotfixing it for you. And your consumers can be at peace that they have a one-click deployment, and every issue that they run into, they reach out to the central IT team, right? So this is a new offering, again, which is called a managed application, where an application is nothing more than a template that you have created, but which is representing your application, obviously, but you can provide it as a managed offering to not just your enterprise, your organization, but you can also sell it on Azure through the Azure Marketplace and charge for it, and charge for support, charge for the management, right?
Nice.
Because
I can not only create these ARM templates, I can monetize these ARM templates straight to Darren, and so he's paying. It's worth it to him because I've spent the hours he doesn't have to do, and I've made an agreement with him to maintain it as well, so it's great. Hey, one capability around these ARM templates, just clarify this with me, is if I have it and I'm deploying a handful of services and VMs, and I need to make a change, like a single change, I'm just going to create a new, I don't know, maybe it's too big to create a subnet or something small inside an ARM template. It's not a full teardown process, is it? You can do incremental updates with the same ARM template that I supply.
That is correct. So in your deployment, you can specify. So there are two modes in the deployment currently that are supported. One is an incremental update, wherein whatever is already there will not be touched, only the diff will be deployed, which is the scenario you're talking about. And then the other is a complete teardown, where the deployment mode is called complete, and it will remove the resources that are not declared in that template that you're declaring or deploying.
So I could do it either way, whichever is right for me.
That is correct, yes.
And it's going to take some know-how on the developer side to know that some things probably can't be changed once they're already set. So you'll just need to realize certain types of resources have things that are set when they're created and only when they're created.
Correct. And even in that, right, we have added some new capabilities to the template language itself, where you have at your disposal some conditionals, right, where you can check, whether this resource is present, then use this existing resource, else create a new one. Right, so all these samples around conditions and whatnot are again at the GitHub repo. But yes, there are powerful capabilities at your disposal now.
So we have a couple of things for developers who are interested in this technology. So they can go to the portal today. They can go into a resource group that they've already created and they want to see how it's created. They can go over to automation scripts and they can start seeing all of that automation script being created for them. They can look at those warnings of things they're going to have to do manually, or they can just learn from the syntax that's automatically created. And then you pointed us to the GitHub site, which has tons of samples that I'm sure you're adding to all the time. And I can learn from that almost as documentation from reading the code rather than having it explained to me. That's just pretty nice. And the way I think a lot of developers are going to learn one of those two ways. Where else might you send a developer that's looking to learn a little more about this?
So I think we touched upon monetizing, right? So I would definitely talk to our developers about, if you now want to monetize your template, look at managed applications, because that is now not only enabling you to monetize your application, but also monetize on the support that you can provide. And then this new capability around making your deployment safer, and how do you do that? So Azure Deployment Manager is a new service. There are public documentation for that, and we can share the links, but I highly recommend you to explore that, because that really gives you the peace of mind of deploying in a very safe manner and iterate quickly on those changes.
So with Deployment Manager, with Resource Manager, they're both under the umbrella of Azure DevOps.
That is correct, yes.
I got it. And they should probably show up in the everyday toolbox of almost every developer using Azure. And if it doesn't, you better explain why.
Exactly.
Yeah, for sure. Gaurav, this is fascinating stuff, and certainly it has made a nightmare process a lot easier. And it's made one of these things where we can move it into a normal workflow developers are already comfortable with as well. So it feels like something that they want to do rather than something that's kind of on the side. Now I'm going to go log into the portal and do this and that. Now it feels better because they can see it, they can test it, and do all the things that make them comfortable as well.
But I think the great thing here is also the introduction of the lifecycle tools to help manage that.
Yeah.
You know, having the scripts was a great starting point, but now introducing that whole sort of oversight, almost supervisor that manages your infrastructure, gives you the view into your relationships and dependencies. I think that really takes it to the next level in terms of a configuration management solution.
Yeah, no doubt. 4 years in the making. Good job, Gaurav.
Thank you, guys.
Thanks for being on the show today.
Cheers.